He was born into a life where he never had to face consequences. He got a fancy title and respect that made his mistakes disappear and his bad behavior seem normal. For decades, that's how things worked. The uniforms, the parades, and the special treatment did more than just make him look important. They let him get away with things. Then something small started to unravel. That small thing became a big thing. And that big thing destroyed everything. The first thing most people remember is the TV interview. Not what he said in it, not the practiced excuses, but how he acted. He sat in front of millions of people and tried to explain why he was seen hanging out with terrible people. He gave a weird list of excuses, the Pizza Express story, saying he couldn't sweat, the strange claims about forgetting things. The interview didn't just hurt him. It showed a man who never learned how to take responsibility for himself. It gave people a weapon, and they used it. People reacted right away, and they were harsh. Overnight, the carefully built image of war hero and beloved son turned into jokes and disbelief. That moment made the scandal real in a way the accusations never had. What happened next wasn't a slow fall. It was fast removal by the royal family. Titles were taken away. Charity positions were removed, and the right to represent the royal family disappeared. The monarchy didn't hold a public trial, it just acted. The special treatment that once defined who he was got taken away not in big announcements, but through quiet paperwork. He could no longer sign his name with the same power. He couldn't walk into a room and expect a salute, because the position that gave him that respect had been quietly taken back. The palace's decision was like a guilty verdict without a courtroom. What makes things worse for him is that new evidence kept showing up after he said it couldn't be true. An email from 2011 came out where, after a photo connected to the scandal was published, he supposedly wrote to Jeffrey Epstein that they were in this together. It was a sentence that didn't just show loyalty. It showed guilt and that they were protecting each other. That supposed private message looks really bad next to his public story where he claimed he stopped being friends with these people. The private email destroys the apology he never really made. It shows a man comfortable with liars and terrible people and unwilling to accept consequences when the truth came out. The public that once cheered for him turned against him. Polls now show a country that wants the last bits of his status removed. Most people across all age groups answered with a simple moral judgment. They don't want him to represent them. They don't want him anywhere near the institution that once lifted him up. That's not a small detail. It's the total judgment of a society that won't accept the image of royalty alongside the accusations and the pattern of secrets. The numbers are harsh. They reduce centuries of politeness to a single public rejection. Behind closed doors, the stories pile up in ways that don't help him. Former workers describe a man who expects the world to bend to what he wants. The story that has stuck in people's minds is about teddy bears. 72 of them lined up in a specific order. A maid was taught how to arrange them. If they weren't placed exactly right, he could get really angry. Small, mean actions like this do more than create gossip. They show what someone is really like. They show a refusal to be responsible for the petty bullying he carried into adulthood. They show what power looks like when no one is watching. Vanity Fair and others who talked to palace staff found the story not silly, but meaningful. It fit a bigger pattern. That pattern is what turns scandal into a story of moral failure. It's easy to point to one email, one interview, one settlement, and one claim. But patterns don't happen by chance. Patterns happen through build-up, the way small mean actions stack up until they become a way of behaving. He went from bragging about privileges to using them badly. He became friends with people who had shady money and secrets. He refused to understand the simple human cost on the people who got pulled into his world. Each new revelation didn't restart the story. It made it worse. And then there were the attempts to get his status back. These were not humble apologies. They sounded like demands. Demands to be allowed back into events and ceremonies he believed were his by birthright. Authors who have studied the family and his place in it now say the answer is no. One biographer said it clearly. The royal system will not bring him back. His private life, the small habits, the constant patterns of entitlement have turned him into someone the institution must hide rather than show off. His world has gotten smaller, just a lodge and a garden. He plays golf and watches TV while a country debates taking away his titles. It's a life whose center was removed and can't be fixed. This is where part one must leave you. Not with something that makes him look softer, but with the image of a man whose protection is gone and whose first reaction is to fight back. The palace has decided he can't represent the monarchy. The public has turned away. Private messages keep showing up to prove there's a gap between his words and his actions. He has the look of someone who has been told the one thing he couldn't accept. He has the look of someone who believes he can still make a deal with a world that no longer listens. So we end on the question that keeps people interested and keeps the story going. When a life is built on privilege and permission and then permission is taken away, what's left of the man who thought himself untouchable? The answer will be harder than the accusation. It will be the slow destruction of his reputation, the steady march of evidence, and the quiet decisions inside the palace that will decide whether any chance of redemption is left to be claimed. Behind palace walls. Before we get to the point where we understand whether he thinks of himself as untouchable or not, we need to understand better how arrogant he is. If you think that childish bullying behind closed doors never matters, then you're wrong. Because behind the public scandals, behind the headlines, is a pattern, a personality revealed, a man who believed everything around him existed for his convenience. He treats them basically like servants to be bossed around. That's how one royal biographer described him in The Rise and Fall of the House of York. Workers say he called his security guard just to get his golf balls like he's some spoiled kid who wants his toys back. He'd drop a tissue on the floor. Expect someone 4 floors down to get it. Someone else opened the curtains. Someone too, anything. What's dignity when you have entitlement? He didn't just demand things be perfect. He demanded ridiculous things. One man was fired because he had a mole on his face. Another fired over wearing a nylon tie. Staff members who broke invisible rules found themselves humiliated, not for big mistakes, for annoyances, tiny imperfections, as if he believed the world was his background set for perfection. There are reports that he would call someone a beep idiot over something as silly as failing to use the right title for the Queen Mother. An insult was thrown like a cheap joke, not behind the scenes. This was real, sharp, and public enough to become part of written history. These are not weird quirks. They are repeated, consistent, everywhere, cruel, bossy, explosive in anger, staff living in fear that a sneeze, a mispronounced title, a wrong tie, or a mole could cost them a job or a day of peace. These stories weigh like stones. They show that when nobody's watching, he's petty and mean. And then there's the public, the regular people, who once saw him as royal, as the Queen's son. They don't see royal. They see pride. They see a grown man supported by golden privilege still throwing fits over stuffed animals. The teddy bear collection went viral not because it's cute, but because it's gross. Dozens of bears arranged, photographed, and laminated cards to show how to arrange them. People on social media mock him. A man with 50 or 60 teddy bears and no self-awareness. Here's what people are saying online. Andrew is an absolute jerk. Mean to staff, nothing more than an entitled brat, man-child, pompous jerk. Helpless without his titles, and worst or best, depending on how you see it. The laughs, the mockery. Teddy bears lined up with a photo to show how they should look like holy objects. He'd rather point out your mole than his own guilt. This isn't just gossip. These are real accounts. Workers who left crying, security officers doing silly tasks, people who served royal blood and got nothing but contempt in return. And what does he do? He doesn't think about his actions. He doesn't apologize. He licks his wounds quietly, gets angry in private, expects things to go back to normal. Even as his world closes around him, he holds on to privilege as though it's his armor, not his prison. Because power is like a drug. And for some, it never stops working even when the world changes the rules. He holds onto a lease, a fancy apartment officially in Buckingham. Expectations, privileges. He refuses to be small. He refuses to step back. He insists the palace still gives in to him even though the palace, the king, and the public have locked him out. Then there are money problems. His allowance is almost cut, and the security is taken away. The king pushed to force him to move somewhere smaller. These aren't just about saving money. They're symbolic. They are saying you are not who you thought you were. One detail shows the same thing. He kept the royal lodge. He still fights for space, both real and symbolic, wanting his address, wanting his presence, wanting the past to hold him dear, though he's lost it. Because what's worse than losing power is thinking it's temporary, that you can get it back. Pride demands that illusion. But reality is stitches that won't hold, when he thought the scandal was the end. This part shows it was only the beginning of showing his true character, of cruelty, of childish tantrums dressed up as royal expectations. And each petty fury, each humiliating demand, each firing over a mole is not small. It's brick by brick building a wall between him and any possibility of redemption. So the question we leave this part with is this: when kindness, decency, and humility are what matters, what kind of man still chooses cruelty and vanity instead? And when you've built your identity on privilege, what happens when everyone around you starts seeing it as entitlement, public collapse, and royal abandonment? After the public found out that he was nothing more than a joke, the entitlement fell off and then started the fallout from that interview. It erupted like a volcano that had been building up beneath the surface of the monarchy, finally exploding. And when it exploded, the heat was unbearable. Almost right away, legal warnings sounded. A lawyer named Paul Tweed pleaded with Andrew's top assistant in the days before the Newsnight interview. He warned that the interview was a disaster waiting to happen. He was ignored. The phone was hung up. Andrew still went forward thinking he could control the damage. He couldn't. The media verdict came quickly. Car crash, nuclear explosion level bad. Worst PR moment the monarchy has seen since Diana. That's not exaggeration in the papers. It's what was written. The world pulled back. Andrew looked unbelievable, disconnected from pain, shameless. As the weeks passed, organizations, charities, military groups, and public groups that once welcomed him now quietly removed him. His honorary military roles were stripped one by one, charity positions ended. The title His Royal Highness, once an unquestioned birthright, was then reduced, quieted, and removed from official use. It was no longer Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, His Royal Highness. He was being taken apart, and the public turned. Poll after poll showed a clear, bitter shift. One survey found 67% of British people believe Andrew should lose all remaining titles. Only 5% still had a positive view of him. The pollsters didn't see a moment of confusion. They saw a verdict. Then came local backlash. In York, the city whose name he carries as Duke, residents demanded he be stripped of his title. 70+% said yes. Public honors like freedom of the city were taken away. Schools considered changing names. Events dropped his name. Places once proud to mention him now saw his title as toxic. Meanwhile, in the semi-private hallways of royalty, the tension was real. The biography, The Rise and Fall of the House of York, painted him not just as flawed, but as cruel, self-centered, and petty. Stories piled up, demanding maids from 4 floors down to open curtains, being furious over a staff member's mole, firing someone for wearing a nylon tie, calling security officers to get his golf balls. These stories drilled into his character. They did more damage than a courtroom ever could. It wasn't only about losing power. It was about losing face. The monarchy, always careful with image, found Andrew's behavior no longer defensible. King Charles and top advisors began treating Andrew less like a son or brother and more as damage control. The palace backed away. His presence at official family events became rare or just for show. Even simple things like being invited to Easter or funerals were considered based on the risk of his name or presence becoming a headline. Money was cut too. The allowances, the security, the public funding that supported him quietly and privately began to shrink. The royal lodge that he lived in stayed under his lease, but keeping it up became a problem without the privileges and prestige that once came with it. King Charles reportedly cut off Andrew's money support in several ways. The message from the top was clear. You can stay, but everything that once made you royal in the eyes of the world is being removed inside the royal family. Not everyone is quiet anymore. Sources say Andrew is deeply hurt by the loss of status, the uniforms, the titles, and the ability to be someone. Biographer Looney claims that what bothers Andrew most is not the interview, but that the symbols of his identity have been taken. He can't parade in uniform. He can't wear what he was born to wear. That hunger for what was taken shows someone more trapped by entitlement than ever, unable to see that what's gone can't come back. And while some guessed his comeback might be possible, others inside and outside the palace now say no way back. Important voices argue that even taking away his remaining titles may be only symbolic but necessary. The risk of leaving him partially royal is too great. It reminds people of scandal, betrayal, broken promises. The institution fears that keeping him in any visible role will forever stain the brand. Erased from the monarchy, now is the time to tell you about the one who announced his end. It all started by the time the palace released its final statement. It was already over. The monarchy doesn't shout its executions, it whispers them. Prince Andrew will no longer do any public duties and will defend this case as a private citizen. It was short, businesslike, and final. The words weren't just an update. They were a burial. He was still alive, but his royal life was dead. Inside Royal Lodge, the huge Windsor estate he held onto, the silence became unbearable. The staff had been cut, the visitors had stopped, and the phone, once buzzing with event planners and royal helpers, barely rang. When it did, it wasn't with invitations. It was with reminders. The royal money was closing. King Charles had made it clear that any remaining money help would be temporary. The monarchy could not keep funding the man the public hated. For the first time, he began to feel what it meant to be untitled in spirit, if not in name. His guards were reduced, his travel limited. Even his daughter's weddings became political puzzles. Could he attend? Could he walk them down the aisle without covering them with shame? The answers came back quietly, painfully, and almost always no. Every attempt at coming back only made the stain deeper. In early 2022, when he was seen walking with the Queen to Prince Philip's memorial, the public backlash was instant. Newspapers ran headlines like, "He's back, and Britain isn't having it." Crowds outside St. George's Chapel whispered in disgust, questioning why a man who had been banned was walking beside the monarch herself. It was a moment meant to show family unity. Instead, it reminded everyone of what the monarchy wanted to forget. Behind palace walls, top aides were furious. That moment, that single appearance, undid months of damage control. Even palace workers, sympathetic to the Queen's motherly instinct, knew the optics were terrible. The Queen had stood by him publicly for the last time. Then, quietly, she died, and with her death, whatever protection remained fell apart. King Charles had waited decades to modernize the monarchy, to protect its image from internal rot. His first move was decisive. Andrew would never return to public life. He could attend family events but not stand on the balcony. He could live on royal land but not represent the crown. He could call himself Duke but not be one in the eyes of the nation. When the coronation came, his exclusion was total. There was no uniform, no salute, no glance toward the throne. He arrived like a relic of a forgotten chapter, escorted by security rather than ceremony. Cameras caught him looking uneasy, his medals stripped from display, the crowd's reaction cold. There was no booing, just silence, the kind that cuts deeper than noise. It wasn't just the public that froze him out. Charities once eager for royal support refused his involvement. Universities cut him from honorary boards. The Commonwealth societies that had carried his name changed their branding to erase the connection. The Duke of York's award, once a youth leadership organization tied to his support, restructured itself to remove his visible trace. He became a footnote, a cautionary tale inside his own legacy. In York itself, petitions grew louder. Citizens urged Parliament to officially strip him of the title Duke of York. Even local politicians spoke publicly, saying the title was an embarrassment. That single name, once a badge of heritage, had become radioactive. The man who once represented the city now symbolized everything it wanted to distance itself from. Privately, Andrew's finances collapsed alongside his reputation. Legal settlements drained millions. Reports claimed the Queen personally paid portions of the settlement to avoid a public trial. But even with that protection, the damage was permanent. The public saw it as money-buying silence, not innocence. Every photograph that came out afterward showed him smaller, paler, diminished. The man who once walked across palace lawns with self-importance now avoided cameras altogether. Former staff described him as irritable, isolated, pacing hallways like a ghost of his former self. The fancy birthday celebrations were canceled. Invitations stopped coming. Even the household pets were reportedly looked after by others. His world shrinking detail by detail, privilege by privilege. And yet he still believed there was a way back. He still had hopes of returning to public duty, believing time would soften outrage. Advisors hinted at quiet charity work, private giving, anything to test the waters. But each attempt failed. Every press leak brought back fury. Every whisper of coming back drew new headlines, calling him delusional. When the BBC's The Newsnight interview film aired years later, dramatizing the moment that ended his career, he was furious again. Not because of creative changes, but because it forced the world to relive the humiliation. The actor playing him became a mirror, one he couldn't escape. Critics called it the most accurate showing of arrogance on television. By now, he had nowhere left to turn. Epstein was dead. His royal circle had shrunk to nothing. Even his friendships within the family were conditional. He lived surrounded by the ghosts of status, the portraits, the crests, the reminders of a title that still existed only because Parliament hadn't yet stripped it away. Royal biographers now describe him as the man who learned nothing. They call his downfall not just a scandal, but a revelation, proof that power without humility eventually eats itself. And maybe that's the truth. Andrew didn't just lose his place in the monarchy. He lost the illusion that privilege could protect him forever. In the end, no formal exile was needed. He became a self-contained one. The public didn't have to destroy him. They just had to stop looking, because invisibility for a man who once lived to be seen is its own kind of punishment. And that's who broke the bad news to him. Not a person, not a statement, but the world itself, quietly, collectively deciding it had seen.